As we put a close to 1989, there is one more important milestone that definitely needs to be mentioned, and that is the North American release of the Turbografx CD. Now, what should be a milestone for both technology and video games ends up being nothing more than basically a dud. And that's unfortunate, but it's due to three major factors of the Turbografx CD alone, and then several factors, and those of you who were alive in 1989 for this holiday season may be able to reflect this, of the video game industry as a whole. So I thought we would take this moment to step aside and take a quick look at that. I think it's most important to just open with the Turbografx CD. So right off the bat, you've got the Turbografx 16. It's been out for about a year in North America. It's selling for $199.99, which gives you the console, the controller, and Keith Courage and Alpha Zones. And it's already plagued by the notion that it has an incredibly limited library, and this is completely true. Hudson was very particular about what they would bring over from Japan, and as such, the library is so limited on the Turbografx 16 that it's actually the biggest deterrent in its selling point, not the price. There are some games available. All games were kind of standardized, much like they are in Japan, so it's kind of the Japanese model brought to America, which isn't uncommon for this time period. All games are $49.99, and at this time, you've just basically got your introductory Turbografx 16 games. You've got Legendary Axe, Victory Run, which is a racing game, Blazing Lasers, which is a shooter, Vigilante, which is a brawler, and of course China Warrior, which is a god-awful game, but it has massive sprites, so it was a big deal. These aren't bad games at all, but they're just a very limited scope, and they give credence to this idea that the Turbografx 16 just desperately needs a larger library. So already at a $200 price point, in comes the Turbografx CD, which is selling, first of all, it requires the Turbografx 16, and it sells for $399.99. $400. Does not have a pack-in. So at this point, if you're buying from scratch, you're paying $600 and you still don't have a game. If you want a game, you've got a whopping two games to pick from. Now, granted, one of them is a very good game, which is Monster Lair, which is the arcade version of Wonder Boy 3. It's a cute 'em up. We've already talked about it. You can check out that episode. The other one is, of course, Fighting Street or Street Fighter 1, which I've already pointed out on the PC Engine CD, now Turbografx CD, is a horrible port. It's not a great game. It's not worth owning. And honestly, it's like the only game in town. While Monster Lair was available, it seems like Fighting Street was really the only game sitting around. On top of that, the game was priced at $49.99 to $59.99 depending on retailer. So you're getting in deep almost $650, $660 just to play Fighting Street? And it's very funny. I even have an article that's linked in the description, so go check it out, where this technological person in Computer Entertainer is talking about how Fighting Street is the only game that's available, like it's a good thing. And it just shows you how disenchanted we were about it. On top of that, there's not much on the horizon. Hudson's already promising. NEC is the hardware manufacturer. Hudson's already promising Valis 2 and Eastbook 1 and 2 coming in the near future, but in 1990 we would only see a total of 8 titles come out, and many of them are the ones you've already seen in this series that also had the United States or North American box art. And so it's getting plagued by this lack of titles. There's also availability. So again, we've got price point, we've got lack of titles, and then you've got availability. Much like the NES launching in 1985, the idea that the Turbografx CD was in store shelves in 1989 is a little laughable. It didn't really come out until 1990, at which point in many areas, especially the wider spread of the United States, you're looking at Eastbook 1 and 2 and Valis 2 coming out at the same time. So really, a lot of people saw this in like spring of 1990 and considered it to be a 4-game launch. But either way, in the holiday season, it's very hard to find. You're talking LA, you're talking New York. I don't even think, I was in Chicago and I don't think it was there. I don't remember it being in my Toys R Us display or anything. And so with this trifecta, this seemingly amazing addition to video games and technology just falls flat. So just jumping straight into it, there is only one company you can think about when you talk about video games. It's why your grandparents sometimes referred to this as video games, like synonymously, which is Nintendo. The NES is doing gangbusters. At this point, it's been out for about 3 solid years, has a really strong library, and there are just games after games after games coming out. And Nintendo's business practices helped it control this kind of mentality, so there wasn't much to be done about it. They also had price point nailed. The console itself is only $99.99 if you wanted just a basic set, but even more enticing is what all parents jumped at, which was the power set at this time period. It's only $149.99 for the holiday, and it's Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, and World Class Track Meet all on one cartridge. Comes with 2 controllers, a light gun zapper, and the power pad. So this is just the all-in-one package for $150, and it was a no-brainer for parents who were late to the party and finally getting an NES in their home. There is no denying there was one game we were waiting for that would not hit the holiday, and we already knew this, which was Super Mario Bros. 3. Nintendo Power had covered it enough. We wanted that game, and we wanted it bad. So in lieu of releasing that game, we have The Wizard, releasing in December 14th, 1989. It stars Fred Savage, which is a child star that was very popular at that time due to the TV show The Wonder Years. And he's teamed up with Jimmy, who is a mildly autistic, maybe he's on the spectrum, brother, and they travel across basically the western part of the United States to go from Nevada to California to enter him in a video game competition. And the culmination of this whole thing is at the very end, Jimmy, along with some of the other finalists, compete in playing Super Mario Bros. 3, which no one had seen or played ever before. It was a big deal. It was the movie that was basically a commercial for Nintendo, but we all ate it up. And Universal Pictures released it, and I went and saw it just to see Super Mario Bros. 3, and I'm sure I'm not alone, but to this day, it's still in my collection. There was the usual gimmicks. The Power Glove had come out. It does make an appearance in The Wizard. And the Power Glove is this $100 controller that's a glove, and it didn't work very well. It was mostly novelty, but it's out there, right? And it's all competing for the money of consumers at this time period. You've got video games, Nintendo games, selling for $39.99 to $49.99 a piece, and they are hitting it from every front. They have licensed games. You've got Batman, RoboCop, the already given worst game of the year, Friday the 13th, and Willow, all on store shelves. You've also got some sequels or predecessors to upcoming sequels out there. So Double Dragon, in anticipation of its sequel, as well as Ninja Gaiden, are selling well all over again. Mega Man 2, which had released earlier, was seeing newfound profit margins at that holiday season. And then, of course, Wizards and Warriors 2, aka Iron Sword, had just come out, has Fabio on the cover, go check it out, but that was doing gangbusters as well. On top of that, you've got new titles like Adventure Island, Blaster Master, and Bionic Commando, which should spring to mind for a lot of you. And then you've even got unlicensed games hitting the market. So Atari had this side title, Tengen, which it was releasing unlicensed Nintendo games. And someday I'll make a video of like the story of all that, but that's going on. And then you've also got Color Dreams, which has found a way to also release unlicensed games on the console, which Nintendo never anticipated and definitely didn't want. But beyond all that, Nintendo is best known in 1989 for one little portable console, and that is the Game Boy. When you think about holiday 1989 in North America, you don't even know the Turbografx CD came out because the Game Boy took over all the headlines. Packed with Tetris, which was the most addictive and must-play game for that console, $89.99. It was a no-brainer. It was what I got. It was what a lot of kids got that holiday season, and that was what people wanted. It's got a plethora of games, way more than the Turbografx CD, and they're selling for $29.99 to $39.99 a piece. An example of some of those games is Super Mario Land, Alleyway, The Castlevania Adventure, Gradius, Boxel, and Hyper Load Runner. Now, it doesn't really matter that some of these ports aren't great. Some of you have played them, know this, but they were there and they were names we knew and they were ready to grab, they were portable and they were cheap and people ate them up. You've got a couple other competitors, but they're both going the way of the dodo. You've got the Atari 7800. Yes, believe it or not, after having moved more than 3 million consoles, the 7800 is still on store shelves. But the end is definitely in sight. While Atari hasn't given up on the console, used game stores have stopped taking in their merchandise, and the console's down to $79.99 by itself, and it's starting to piggyback a lot of Nintendo's popularity in order to gain praise. So first of all, you've got this controller, which is easily an NES gamepad just emulated. You've got carts out there. They're dirt cheap. They're $19.99 to $29.99, and they're really raking in on Nintendo titles. So listen to these titles. Like, you've got Double Dragon, and here's some footage. It's pretty cool looking. I mean, all in all, for an Atari console. You've got Rampage, Kung Fu Master, aka Kung Fu, and Ikari Warriors. They've got a lot of arcade ports, and they're trying to piggyback the fact that it was 2600 backward compatible. So those of you with the 2600/VCS libraries from either your parents, older siblings, or just a garage sale could also integrate these into your game playing. But at the end of the day, it just did not compete with Nintendo in any way, shape, or form, the NES. And then you've got the Sega Master System. This is the final holiday for the Master System. The Sega Genesis, which I'll talk about and close with in a minute, is already out in North America. Sega's pushing it hard. It's not the focus. In Japan, it's already been retired. It would get a couple more holidays here in America, but in Japan, it's over. The console's selling for $99.99, not a good price point because you are going toe-to-toe with the NES, which is not ideal. Sega would finally reluctantly drop it to $69.99 in spring of 1990, but we're not there. If you have a Genesis, the power base converter, which allows you to play Master System games in the Genesis, is only $39.99 and already readily available. So there's just no reason to have this console anymore. Carts are $29.99 to $49.99, and you're starting to see in magazines that they are no longer taking in trade-ins on used carts. Some were, some weren't, but it's back and forth. Notable titles for this time period: Phantasy Star, which I do think sold at a premium price. You've got R-Type still going strong, which is a decent arcade port, and it was one of those things that was just not on the NES. And then also Ultima 4. Now, I don't know how many of you Quest to the Avatar fans are out there. I don't remember if this had hit Nintendo yet, the NES yet, but that would have been a big deal for the holiday as well. Finally, you've got the Sega Genesis, and I gotta say, beyond the NES, if you were moving on, you didn't look at the Turbografx 16 and definitely not the CD console. You looked at the Sega Genesis. Sega did a really good job of placing that console near the NES console in just about every toy store in America. It was everywhere. So already it's readily available, which is one of those three key problems that the Turbografx CD had. Turbografx 16 to a certain extent, but the Turbografx CD definitely had when it came out. It's priced at $189.99 with one controller and Altered Beast. You're already offering more than the Turbografx is at a cheaper price. And Altered Beast, while not very popular in Japan, was huge in North America. I don't know why we like this game so much, but as a person who admits it's not a good game but loves it, we had to play it. We loved that this was in this console. And also, beyond that, the Sega Genesis was known first and foremost for just being an amazing for having amazing ports of all of Sega's games from the arcades. And this just solidifies itself with both first-party and third-party titles with games like Golden Axe, Phantasy Star 2, which wasn't quite out, but it was on the horizon, Thunder Force 2, an amazing shooter, Tommy Lasorda Baseball, which isn't that notable until you realize that right after this in 1990, EA starts doing its individual carts on the Genesis, and the Genesis really becomes synonymous with a sports console as well. They've got a port of Space Harrier 2, but nothing compared to Ghouls and Ghosts. Now, some of you may know it as Ghosts and Goblins. It would come to the SNES as Super Ghouls and Ghosts. These are all different games, but Ghouls and Ghosts was only available in the arcades, and this was a Capcom arcade game, and this came out and just blew everyone away. Even if you didn't have a Genesis, you wanted to have a Genesis. It looked very similar to the arcade, sounded very similar to the arcade, and most importantly, played just like the arcade. And this got Game of the Year and several other awards from EGM. It just impressed people. And Capcom will come back and do this with Strider in a very short period of time as well on the Genesis. So the Genesis is the go-to for arcade gaming at home if you can afford some extra money. But even at $190, it's below the Turbografx 16 by itself and doesn't even come close to the $600 price tag of the Turbografx 16 with the CD. And so as it stands in 1989, what really happens is Turbografx just gets pushed to the wayside completely thanks to the Genesis, and the CD-ROM console is just a non-point. And we won't see it really gain any sort of attention in the United States outside of a couple of faithfuls until 1992 with the release of the SEGA CD. You'll see, we'll talk about it a little bit, you'll see in North America there's some niche products that are coming out like the Philips CDI. But for the most part, this new technology was dead on its feet. And it's definitely why it's hard to find a Turbografx CD today. Most people have a Turbo Duo R from Japan or a PC Engine CD from Japan because they're just very rare because not a lot of people bought them. And it's really unfortunate because as these previous games have shown, and as future games will show, there's a lot to love on that console. And since it was region free, even if you had an American version, you could import these games. So anyway, that's how North America kind of embraced or didn't embrace the CD-ROM console. And so let's move on into 1990 and cover a lot of these games. But at this point, you should be paying close attention to, is there one box art or is there two? Because if there's two, that means it's one of those rare games that Hudson decided to bring over to North America and see a release here.